Imagine racing through the night to help someone you love, only to have your loyalty thrown back in your face the very next day. That's exactly what happened inside Elvis Presley's tight-knit circle, where a terrifying health scare led to a shocking clash of tempers, pride, and betrayal. What unfolded behind closed doors would leave even his closest friends stunned, and it's a side of Elvis few ever dared to talk about, until now. In the final years of his life, Elvis Presley was living in a world where the bright lights of fame masked a darker, more fragile reality. Behind the dazzling stage performances and adoring crowds, he struggled with declining health and an increasing reliance on prescription medication. Those close to him could see the toll it was taking. Moments of fatigue that came too often, sudden lapses in energy, and a vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the powerful image the world knew as the King. It wasn't just the physical strain. There was an unspoken heaviness in the air, a sense that something deeper was unraveling. Within his inner circle, the mood often teetered between loyalty and quiet desperation. Friends and confidants, men who had stood by him through triumphs and storms alike, watched helplessly as he leaned further into habits they knew were dangerous. They whispered their concerns to each other, shared worried glances, and debated how far they should go in trying to intervene. Yet for all their love and devotion, they were bound by an unspoken rule. Elvis was not a man who welcomed advice, least of all when it challenged the way he lived. What made it even more difficult was just how fiercely protective Elvis was of his independence. Any hint that someone was trying to manage him was met with resistance, sometimes sharp, sometimes explosive. Friends learned quickly that even a gentle suggestion about his health or lifestyle could flip the mood in an instant. To question him was to risk being shut out, and for those whose lives revolved around him, that was a terrifying prospect. Still, some felt they had no choice but to try, and when they did, the consequences were often as dramatic as they were heartbreaking. It was deep into the night when the phone rang, shattering the stillness with urgency. On the other end was Elvis Presley, his voice heavy and unsteady, admitting that he couldn't walk. For Jerry Schilling, one of the few people Elvis trusted enough to call in moments of weakness, the words landed like a punch. Without hesitation, Jerry rushed out, his heart pounding with dread at what he might find. The man the world knew as strong, commanding, and larger than life suddenly sounded fragile, and that alone was enough to send alarm bells ringing in Jerry's mind. When Jerry arrived, the scene before him was worse than anything he had imagined. Elvis, once a towering figure of energy and charisma, was now nearly helpless, struggling just to get off the floor. The contrast was almost unbearable. The king of rock and roll, adored by millions, reduced in that moment to someone in desperate need of help. Jerry's shock was matched only by his fear. This wasn't just a bad night. It was a glimpse into a reality few were allowed to see, a reality that stripped away the legend and revealed a vulnerable man clinging to what strength he had left. But Jerry's alarm quickly transformed into fury when he confronted Elvis' doctor, who appeared far too calm, far too detached, offering explanations that sounded more like excuses. Placebos? That's all he had been giving him? Jerry's voice rose, filled with anger and desperation, demanding answers, demanding action. This wasn't just about frustration. It was about loyalty, about protecting a man he loved like family. In that heated moment, Jerry wasn't a member of Elvis's entourage. He was a friend fighting with every ounce of his being to save someone he refused to watch slip away. By the next morning, the storm seemed to have passed, or at least that's what it looked like at first glance. Elvis was up, moving around with surprising energy, even perched on an exercise bike as if nothing had happened the night before. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a miracle recovery, but for Jerry Schilling, there was no relief. The sharpness in Elvis's eyes made it clear that this wasn't a return to normal. It was the calm before a different kind of storm. What Jerry expected was at least a moment of gratitude, some recognition that he had rushed through the night to help when things looked dire. Instead, what he got was pure anger. Elvis, the man Jerry had defended and worried over, turned the spotlight back on him, his voice rising with a scathing edge. He made it clear that no friend, no matter how loyal, had the right to question the men he trusted with his health. The room grew tense, the words cutting deeper than any wound a stranger could deliver, because they came from someone Jerry cared about. Then came the line that burned itself into Jerry's memory. "When you guys get your medical degree, then you can tell my doctors what to do." It was sharp, dismissive, and final. In that instant, Jerry knew there was no winning. Silence was his only option. He swallowed his frustration, forcing himself to stand quietly as Elvis continued, realizing he had crossed an invisible boundary in Elvis's world. The message was clear: love and loyalty had their limits, and when it came to his health, Elvis would decide who had a voice and who didn't. Jerry Schilling wasn't the only one who wrestled with the impossible choice of speaking up. Others in Elvis's inner circle, like Red West and Sonny West, had also tried to intervene when they saw things spiraling out of control. These weren't casual acquaintances. They were longtime friends who had traveled the road with him, shared the highs of stardom, and endured the grueling grind of life on tour. They cared deeply for him, and at times their concern boiled over into heated confrontations, desperate attempts to pull him back from a path they feared could destroy him. But their efforts, no matter how well-intentioned, never landed the way they hoped. Instead of gratitude or change, Elvis often responded with resistance, anger, or outright dismissal. Eventually, even those closest to him learned there were lines that couldn't be crossed without consequences. For Red and Sonny, the breaking point came when their constant warnings were seen as too much interference. The result was brutal and final. Both were cast out, fired from the circle they had dedicated their lives to protecting. What began as loyalty ended in exile, leaving them on the outside of a world they had once been at the very heart of. This was the impossible reality of Elvis's entourage, a tightrope walk between devotion and silence. Speak up, and you risk being cut off forever. Stay quiet, and you watch helplessly as the man you love continues to decline. It was a trap with no good options, and every member of his inner circle knew it. Their lives revolved around him, yet their voices held little power when it came to the choices that mattered most. The weight of that silence was crushing, and it left many of them wondering if they had failed him, or if they had simply never stood a chance. Elvis Presley later shed light on why so few people dared to step in, and her words carried the weight of someone who knew him better than most. "You did not tell Elvis Presley what to do," she explained, painting a picture of a man whose authority was absolute within his circle. It wasn't just about fame, it was about presence. Elvis commanded a room in a way few could, and even those closest to him understood that challenging him directly was like walking into a storm. You could try, but you wouldn't come out unscathed. Some friends, desperate to help, tried subtle tricks, hiding medication, diluting doses, or even replacing pills with placebos. But Elvis was sharp, sharper than many realized, and he was never fooled. He always knew when someone was trying to outmaneuver him. The attempt alone could turn a moment sour, creating tension that no one wanted to live under. It left his loved ones with a chilling realization. If Elvis didn't want to change, no amount of cleverness or quiet intervention was going to make it happen. At the heart of it all was his charisma, the kind that could silence a room with nothing more than a glance. Elvis wasn't just the king to the world. He was the unquestioned leader of his own inner universe. His words carried weight, his moods dictated the atmosphere, and his approval, or disapproval, could determine whether someone remained close or was pushed aside. That power, unspoken but undeniable, kept many from speaking up. They loved him, they feared losing him, and so they stayed silent, trapped by the very force that made Elvis who he was. The story circles back to that unforgettable night when Jerry Schilling rushed through the darkness to answer a desperate call. He arrived to find Elvis at his most vulnerable, a moment that could have broken down any wall of pride or ego. Jerry acted from instinct, loyalty, fear, and love guiding his every move. Yet what should have been a turning point instead became a wound, one that cut not just Elvis but Jerry as well. By the next day, when Elvis's anger spilled out, it became clear that his friend's devotion would not be met with gratitude, but with sharp rejection. For Jerry, the sting went deeper than the words themselves. Loyalty, after all, is not blind. It carries with it sacrifice and risk. He had stepped forward when so many others hesitated, had dared to speak out when silence was easier, only to be told he had overstepped. The emotional weight of that moment was heavy. How could a friend stand by and do nothing? Yet how could he withstand the fury that came when he tried to intervene? The clash of love and defiance left scars that were not easily forgotten. And in that clash lies the tragic truth of Elvis' inner circle. They were men and women bound by devotion, yet powerless against the very force they sought to protect. Jerry's experience was not just a single incident, it was emblematic of the impossible struggle his closest companions faced. Every attempt to safeguard him carried the risk of pushing him further away. Their loyalty was tested, their silence haunted them, and their choices, whether to speak or to stay quiet, were met with heartbreak either way. It was a no-win battle, and Jerry's rejection stood as one of its most painful reminders. If you enjoyed uncovering this untold side of Elvis' life, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more stories like this. Give this video a like if it kept you hooked, and most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Do you think his friends could have done more, or was Elvis simply beyond anyone's help? Your voice makes this community stronger, so jump into the conversation.